You heavily rely on your car's fuel gauge to accurately indicate when you need to refuel while you are driving. Without it, each journey is fraught with danger, and you'll never know if you have enough fuel to make it home. You need to be aware of the causes of any malfunctions or inaccuracies in your fuel gauge in case this crucial piece of equipment stops working. In this short video, we will talk about the most common causes of fuel gauge malfunctioning. We will also tell you how to diagnose the problem and estimate the cost of a replacement. It's the Car Problems YouTube channel. Subscribe and let's get started. Circuit issues. Electricity is used to power the fuel gauge, so functional wiring and circuitry are necessary. There might not be enough voltage for the gauge to read correctly if the system has a fault. In some instances, a broken ground connection is the cause of the problem. However, any corroded or loose connection can cause problems. Due to the connection to the fuel pump module's constant exposure to the elements, these flaws are most frequently found there. Defective sending unit. The sending unit is where the process starts in its entirety. The sending unit continuously checks the fuel level in the tank as your car is moving. However, due to its frequent use, it is vulnerable to wear. The circuits can continue to function if the contacts become worn. Depending on how the car is configured, the fuel gauge may interpret the voltage feedback as indicating that the tank is either empty or full. In this situation, no matter how much fuel is in the tank, the gas gauge won't change. Bad fuse. The fuel gauge makes use of both electrical connections and a fuse. The fuse can be found in the box on the driver's side of your car or under the steering column. Under the hood of some cars is a fuse box as well. It takes just a few minutes and is easy to check the fuse. To figure out which fuse controls the gas gauge, consult the owner's manual. When the fuel gauge is integrated with the instrument cluster, many newer cars do not have a separate fuse, but it is still a good idea to check. Malfunctioning instrument cluster. The instrument cluster is a single, integrated piece of equipment in newer vehicles. It's all connected, not using multiple circuits. The gas gauge may malfunction in this system if the instrument cluster does. Regrettably, fixing this is one of the most expensive problems. Broken gas gauge. Even though it's less likely, this flaw could still be to blame. The fuel gauge has an internal circuit that is susceptible to failure. The needle could read at any level if this occurs. It might be a failed circuit in one area if the gauge is between halfway and full or empty. Otherwise, the circuit is shorted if the needle is stuck at full or empty. The gauge won't probably ever move again unless it is changed. Unfortunately, on newer cars, the gas gauge is frequently integrated with the instrument panel. How to test. Check fuse. First, make sure the fuse is working. Occasionally, the fuse will power multiple gauges, so you might also notice that one of them isn't reading correctly. Replace any blown fuses you find, then retest the gauge. However, if the fuse keeps blowing, you might be dealing with a bigger issue with your electrical system. Self-test instrument cluster. To find out if your instrument cluster has a self-test method, consult your owner's manual. You might need to repeatedly press a button while turning the headlights on and off, but it might also require turning the ignition. You ought to notice the fuel gauge performing a full sweep of all the various locations during this self-test. If not, there is a problem with the instrument cluster or fuel gauge. Inspect wiring. Although it is not difficult, checking all of the wiring does take time. Start by looking at the wiring harness near the gas tank. Additionally, pay attention to the ground connections, which can corrode as a result of rain, snow, and salt. Remove the connection and clean it if you notice any corrosion. Make sure it is reattached to the proper spot. You must replace any wires that are broken. Test sending unit. You must check the sending unit after making sure that all of the wiring is in order and that the fuse is functioning properly. Sometimes, all that's broken is the float. Set the ohm setting on your multimeter to test the sending unit. With the other probe on the ground, place one on the sending terminal. The resistance reading on your multimeter ought to change as you move the float. Your sending unit has failed if there is no change. It will be more difficult to test a sending unit that has the fuel pump built into the assembly. The entire pump assembly must be replaced if these malfunction. The process is made significantly more challenging in some car models where the fuel tank must be removed in order to access the sending unit. Check the gauge. Older vehicles should have a gauge with two terminals, while the other is the wire coming from the sending unit. One is used to receive power whenever the ignition is turned on. Check for continuity between the tank connection and the sending terminal. You must locate a wiring break if there is no continuity. By measuring the resistance, you can test the fuel gauge as well. With an updated vehicle's integrated instrument cluster, it may be next to impossible to accomplish this. It's best to carefully inspect the wiring and sending unit first because you might need to disassemble the entire cluster to get to the gauge. Replacement cost. The cost to repair a bad fuel gauge can range from $10 to $800 depending on the cause. The cheapest fix is to replace a blown fuse, which could cost you only $10 and is simple to do on your own. As long as you can do the work yourself, replacing a damaged fuel gauge can cost anywhere from $50 to $200. If not, you might have to pay the mechanic an additional $100 to $200. The sending unit is frequently the most expensive repair. The part may not only be costly but also time-consuming to replace. For the sender to be accessible on some car models, the entire fuel tank must be removed. Depending on the type of vehicle you drive, your final cost could range from $200 to $800. Hope the information was useful for you. If so, please press the like button and subscribe to the channel.